Hey up and welcome to another episode of Last Cast. You join us today on the Calder and Hebble Canal, a bit further downstream from Avocet Mills, more towards Brighouse. And we're going to cover something today that you don't really see a lot of people doing on the canal, and that's rod and line fishing. We're only down here for a few hours today, so there's no point setting up a ton of kit in terms of the pole and the ground bait mix and things like that. So I've decided to just keep it dead simple with the rod and line approach. This section of canal, as you can see, is quite wide, so it lends itself really nicely to this style of fishing. But equally, the things that we'll show you should work on narrow canals as well. In terms of the peg, it's about 20 metres wide, and the boat channel's actually on the inside, and it shelves up quite nicely towards the far bank in about 3 or 4 foot of water. So in terms of the rods that I've got set up, I've set up a float rod and a link ledger. Again, this is sort of the canal style of fishing that a lot of kids would have started on 20-30 years ago, but commercial since. You very rarely see people on the canals or kids on the canals learning to fish with wagglers and things like that. So in terms of the float, I've just got a Dren & glow tip antenna, a really nice fine float for this style of fishing. As you can see with the banding on there, it's going to allow us to read drop bites and see as that bait's falling through the water. The only other patterns of floats that I'd look at for this style of fishing that are pretty much the same kind of thing are the Dren & still water blues. Again, really nice thin cane insert on those, and that's the key thing. You want a lot of sensitivity with this style of fishing. As I said there, we're going to look to fish through the water with this to the bottom. I've plumbed up and I've set the float about 6 inches over depth, because you've got to negotiate the fact that the canal is going to tow and the wind's going to push your float along, so you do want to lay on a little bit of line. In terms of the shot in there, I've got the smallest size styles that I could get. They're probably the equivalent of probably less than a number 13, really lightweight, and I've got those strung out down the line, just getting a bit more spread out towards the hook length. The bulk shot around the float, I've gone for a 4BB glow tip antenna, just to make sure I can reach that far bank nice and easily, say if the wind gets up or anything like that. The main line that I've actually got on this float rod is an 014 diameter Daiwa TDR, which breaks at about £3. Again, nice thin lines make casting with light floats easier, and also help you to chop through the surface tension on these canals, which are usually flat calm, so it just helps sink the line. So as I say, that moves down, and then I've got a 6-inch hook length there of 095 fluorocarbon to a size 22 hook, and that's on a 6-inch hook length. The reason for a 6-inch hook length is because of the depth. As you can see, we've got about 3 foot. I want to get that last dropper nice and close to the hook to show up bites, and equally when I'm fishing right across, I can lay that last dropper on the bottom just to make sure that bait's absolutely nailed to the deck. So I'll just pop this to one side and show you the other rig that I've got set up. As I say, because of the distance that we're fishing, I can actually use a ledger setup as well. So on this, I've just got a 10-foot Sigma wand, 3000 size reel, again 014 TDR mainline, nice and thin, and I've just got a 2 SSG link ledger on there. Hook length and hook is exactly the same as on the Waggler rod, except I've just got a size 20 on there. Just a bit more purchase if we are encountering bigger fishes I might expect to catch on this. Nice short link there, and the hook length probably about 2 foot. I might look to shorten that down if I'm missing a few bites, but nice and sensitive setup, nice soft quiver tip in the end. Again, we're not looking to catch big fish today, we're just looking to get a few bites, so it's just allowing us to catch everything. In terms of the bait, all I've got is hemp and maggots, and I'm just going to look to catapult those towards the far bank. As I say, not here for too long, so I'm just going to fish one line against the far bank where I think the bulk of the fish will be. In terms of the stamp of fish that we're looking to catch today, probably quite small, few roach, few perch, things like that, more your typical canal fish, but again, it's nice just to cover something that you don't see a lot of people doing on the canals. Very rarely, as I say, you'll go down and see people actually fishing rod and line, but obviously not everyone can afford a £1,000, £2,000 pull to fish these far banks on wider sections of canals. The way to achieve getting there is with rod and line like this. So as I say, that's all the rigs and everything covered, and the bait as well. So we'll get into the session and just show you how we go about approaching the peg with rod and line tactics. Right, so I'm going to start on the Waggler with this and start catapulting bait across, but I'll just quickly run through what I've done to start off at the beginning of the session while I was setting up. I've plumbed up using a nice heavy plummet up to the far bank, or probably about up to 2 metres off, just to work my way up to the sort of the far bank features, really, sort of the brambles and things like that. And what I've done is I've cast out and just crept my way up to work out what kind of slope I'm fishing against, and it turns out it's quite a gentle slope, obviously coming towards me, but up against the far bank I've probably got a good 2.5–3 foot, and then down the track, it's, as I say, the track's probably no more than halfway across here, so it just slopes up from about 4 foot to 3.5 foot, and then again a bit further past up towards 2.5 foot towards the far bank. So it goes up quite steadily. And as I say, the crucial thing when you're plumbing up is never actually have any of your bulk shot or droppers on the line when you're plumbing up. Just use the float so it's got maximum buoyancy to pull against the plummet, and that gives us a really good reading. And then what I've done is actually I've put the shot on. Before I've put a hook length on, I've cast up to the far bank and got as tight as I can and clipped up. So every time I'm casting now, I've got my hook bait landing just past the float, and it also tightens the line up to the float on the cast. So as you'll see now, when I do cast out, what happens, it lays the rig out nice and tight to the far bank, so it gives me the maximum amount of line to sink to draw the float back to where I want to be fishing, which, as I say, is a metre or two off that far bank. Just recast because that wasn't particularly great cast that time. The crucial thing, like with any style of fishing like this, where you're fishing to a clip, is you need to make sure you hit that clip every time. As you can see there, the float's gone in, just sink the line, and the float's set nicely there. But you can see just how close to the far bank that float was landing. The hook bait just lands probably about half a foot or a foot short, and that's where I'm looking to get that line straightened out basically. So as soon as that float hits the clip, there's a bite straight away there. As soon as that float hits the clip, the line's absolutely tight from the rod end to the hook, which means that obviously I'm in contact with the float, and it also removes the bow in the line. So if I was just feathering the float into the water, then I'd create a little bit of a bow in the line, which with the downstream wind that we've got today would mean that sinking the line and getting that bait presented effectively against the far bank would be very difficult. So that maggot looks okay that time. So again, you can see making sure I hit that clip and sink the line as quickly as I can. I'm also feeding a bit of hemp today, and as you can see there, I'm just feeding 6 or 7 grains of hemp and probably 3 or 4 maggots each cast. Obviously, because of the distance that we're fishing, it's hard to get really accurate feeding or keep the grouping nice and tight. So you've just got to be aware of that. You're not going to get the same quality of presentation, missed a bite that time, as you would on the pull. But then again, on wider sections of canal, they'll tend to hold a few more fish, so it's not really too much of an issue. But if you are fishing a narrow section, you just want to cut down on the feed, and again, just try and be as accurate as you possibly can be. As you can see there, after I've cast and hit the clip, in order to sink the line effectively against the toe as well, which is going in the same direction, I'm having to mend the line after the float's landed just by flicking the rod over, just to make sure that the line's actually arcing into the wind a bit more. And again, say if conditions get worse or the wind picks up, I may have to put even more line on the bottom. Hopefully that won't be the case, and we'll be able to get, missed another bite that time, effective presentation. As you can see, the fish are very finicky and you get really fast bites from these roach. So that's why a sensitive rig's really, really important. The great thing about this style of fishing is, although it's quite difficult, it is very rewarding when you do get it right. And obviously it's far cheaper in terms of the tackle that you need than pole fishing on these kind of canals. So in the UK, canals are very common in terms of accessibility, and there's a lot of canal venues that you can fish, but they are quite difficult. Another bite that time. And I think a lot of people are put off fishing them because they are challenging venues, and often, as I say, not a lot of people can afford a top end pull. So when you do just have rod and line tactics, canals can be quite difficult, but hopefully by employing some of these kind of tips that we'll show you today, you might be able to get the best out of your rod and line fishing on the canal. As you can see, I'm missing a few bites to start off the session, but I think that's just as the fish are trying to gain a bit of confidence. The other thing as well, when you fish into a far bank like this on a canal, you're effectively looking for no more than 30 seconds or a minute of good presentation before you're having to recast. As I say, the tow is going down that way as well, and the wind's blowing in, so that's going to compromise presentation. So you only get, as I say, 30 seconds or a minute of effective presentation when you are fishing far out like that. They are proving very hard to hit these bites. But again, this kind of rig that I'm using, you could equally use down the track. Probably you'd look to introduce a bulk shot into the rig, maybe group a few of the styles together just to get the bait down. But again, the good thing is it does work across every section of canal. The main thing that you've got to think about is how much the canal's towing. Obviously, when the canal does start to tow, it's effectively useless is the Waggler, and that's, there we go, we're into the first fish. Feels like a nice roach. That's when the link ledger really comes into its own. Yep, nice little roach to start off the session. See if he'll behave. Just pop that down. There you go, a lovely little canal roach. And these are the kind of fish that we're looking to catch today, just to build a little bit of a weight. So I'll just slip a little maggot on again. As I was saying though, if the canal starts to tow, that's when I'll immediately pick up the link ledger. And also the link ledger can be very effective when you do start to miss bites, or you're not getting any bites at all. It's amazing sometimes on canals like this how much of a difference it can make to just switch that presentation, even though you're fishing the same line and same baits. It can make a massive difference to your catch rate. And I've certainly found on this section of canal in previous sessions that the link ledger can often pick up the much bigger roach that are in your peg. Just had another bite then. Obviously, one thing you do have to be aware of as well when you're fishing the canal like this is the fact that you are using very small hooks and very light lines just to get bites. So obviously you can't go pulling the fish too hard. So it's important that you have a nice quality reel with a really nice drag that you can just set fairly slack. Because the last thing that you want to be doing is pulling the hook out of fish that you have hooked. And as we might encounter a few quality roach later on, that's a prime example of what can be the case. Is as they sort of jag their heads around, you can just pull that hook out very easily if you don't have the clutch set nice and slack. So what I tend to do when I am catching fish like that on the canal is, rather than actually sort of pumping the fish back by bringing the rod back and gaining line in that way, I'll just wind really slowly and just let the drag do the work, much in the same way that you'd allow the elastic to do the work on a pole. Not had a bite that time. And again, I think the maggot's gone as well. One thing that I will point out as well is that you've got to also take into account the fact that your bait will be moving down the peg as well. So rather than sort of setting yourself a far bank marker as such, obviously I will use one to cast to. Just have to sort this out a little bit. But I will also look to sort of feed an area, but let the float run through, much in the same way that you would do on the river. But I'll just have to sort this tangle out, as I say. And that's the problem when you're using really light lines, as we are today. Sometimes that can happen when the wind does catch it. Right, so I've just quickly sorted out that little tangle, but it does happen when you're using small styles like that. Sometimes you can get quite bad line twist. Obviously that's just part and parcel of using very fine lines and delicate rigs. Just going to cast the float out again, and as I say, the key thing is with this style of fishing on the Waggler is trying to get that line sunk as fast as you can. Obviously on narrower canals it'll be a little bit easier because you won't get the same level of wind, but equally you won't have that same gentle slope against the far bank to fish to. So there's certain things that you just have to consider. Obviously if I was on a smaller venue then I'd use a smaller float, maybe a 3 or 2 BB, something like that. And I might not actually have to sink the line on a venue like that. But obviously today we're on a very wide section of canal, just as the canal starts to go around a bend, and there's an inlet over to our right hand side which is from a small stream. Another small fish on now. And that creates a very wide section of canal here. Again, smaller stamp, but you can see just how sensitive the rig is to pick up bites from these fish. So you're not going to build a massive weight with this style of fishing. Just try and get him out of the net. But it's just a nice easy way to go about tackling these canals rather than having to set up a ton of different top kits and rigs. You can just set up a simple Waggler rod and a nice little link ledger and just go about fishing really quite easily. And obviously this kind of fishing as well lends itself to places where you might have a very narrow tow path where shipping back can be very difficult as well. So because I'm just sort of starting to ease my way into the session a little bit, I'm feeding maggots probably once every 3 or 4 casts and focusing mainly on the hemp. Obviously maggots are quite a filling bait for these fish, and until you get a few in your peg, there's another one on now, you don't want to go too mad with them. Another nice little roach. Cracking little fish to catch on the canal, these. Another one. Again, they're all very lightly hooked, these ones so far. Just shows how tentative the bites are. And that's why you do need these sensitive rigs. In terms of the actual shotting pattern on this, the reason why I've gone for so many small shot as opposed to, say, 2 or 3 number 10s is because what it does by having so many smaller shot, it actually keeps that line tighter between the hook and the float, allowing you to hit bites a lot quicker. The other thing as well that I'll point out is that I've got a nice gap of about 1 inch to allow that float to slide between the bulk shot, and that's absolutely essential when you're getting quick bites off these fish, because it means that you're not actually striking through the float. You're much more direct on the fish because there's 1 inch or so of movement there where it's not actually pulling against the shot. It's quite hard to explain when you are actually fishing with the rig, but you'll notice when if you actually use it yourself, you'll feel on the strike that you're not actually hitting that much resistance from the float, and obviously that allows you to be a lot quicker on the bites. There's another fish now. Again, only a small stamp of fish so far. But still great fun on light tackle like we're using today. Another roach, only 1 ounce or so. As you can see, absolutely immaculate condition. Gorgeous blue colours on the fish as well. So hopefully we'll get into a good run of fish on the Waggler, and then when we do employ the link, we'll run you through how we go about using that as well. One thing that I will say as well is on some of these canals, especially the one that we're on today, you'll see the near side towpath is actually reed lined, and obviously that means that there's a few predators that are going to sit in there like pike and things like that. Another bite there. So it is important that you do think about how quickly you do bring the fish in terms of under your rod tip and near your keep net, because the pike will often sit there. So it's just something that you do have to be aware of. You don't want to play around with the fish too much on this near side banking, especially with the clarity of the water as well. The pike will very quickly see the flash of a roach and have a go at it. Another thing to think about as well with this style of fishing is you want to get into a rhythm. That's how you sort of get to build a decent weight on the canal when you are, or say in any sort of venue where you are waggler fishing, is getting into a good rhythm. As you can see, what I'm doing is casting, hitting the clip, sinking the line, and then feeding and just waiting for a bite. Just pulled out of that one there. So in order to build a half decent weight fishing the waggler like this, it is just about settling into your peg. You can see there the maggot's just doubled over the hook point, which is why we've lost that one, but it's bound to happen. And as I say, the crucial thing is with this method that you'll see us using today, we've been quite fortunate in that we're getting bites pretty much from the off. But very often you'll have to wait for half an hour or maybe even an hour and just keep building the peg, trickling the maggots in. Because you're compromised in terms of the precision with which you're feeding and fishing compared to the pole, you've just got to be aware that you do need to try and build a bit more of a shoal of fish. If there's 2 or 3 there, the odds of you catching one are quite slim, because you are actually having to feed a fair bit of bait to keep the fish interested. So it's important that you set out where you want to fish, plumb up nice and accurately, and stick to your guns through the session when you are fishing like this. So obviously I've come down here today, I know this area of canal fairly well, and what I've done, as I say, is decided to fish that far bank a couple of metres off where I know there's a nice gentle slope. And all I'm going to do is just keep plunging that one area of the peg. Obviously if you were fishing with a pole, you'd have 2 or 3 top kits set up and you'd be sort of moving around different areas. Whereas with this, it's important that you pick that one area and just concentrate on that. Make sure that you can be as accurate as you can with your catapult and feeding, and try and suss the peg out from there. Because very often it'll be a case of you won't get any bites for the first 15-20 minutes, and then you'll just start getting 1 or 2 indications as you start to build the peg. Whereas obviously if you were pole fishing after 10 or 15 minutes on one line and you weren't getting bites, you'd probably look at moving. So again, it is important when you are canal fishing to think about how much you're feeding. On the bulker canals, there's not going to be a lot of fish in front of you, so it's about trying to increase that level of competition. So if I was going to, say, fish in the river or something like that, then I'd put in a lot more bait than this. Even compared to the Calder, I'm probably feeding half of what I'd feed on the Calder here, so it gives you an idea that you don't need to feed a lot of bait at all, because you're trying to get just the few fish that are there competing. So to that end, this style of fishing is also nice and cheap. You might need half a pint of maggots and just a tin of hemp, and that'll be all you'll need for 5 or 6 hours. Just fishing like this, just feeding 6 to 7 grains of hemp and a couple of maggots each cast. And as I say, very quickly you can start to get a few bites, and it's just nice fishing, to be honest. One's had the maggot that time. As I say, it makes a nice change from spending ages mixing up ground bait, setting up your pole rollers and 5 or 6 different top kits. It's nice just to come down here with a couple of rods for a few hours and just get a few bites. And obviously this style of waggler fishing as well can be very useful on small, quite difficult lakes and venues where you're just targeting small fish and they can be very finicky. It's a very good way of catching in clear water as well. Obviously compared to the pole, you're not actually, it's not like you're waving 16 metres of carbon over the fish's heads. So again, it's a bit more of a delicate approach in that sort of aspect, is that you're able to fish way beyond pole range, and just basically get to fish where other people who are fishing the pole would struggle to reach. And just by casting a nice little float over the top of them, another indication there. They're less likely to spook from the activity of, as I say, having a pole over their heads. So as you can see, we're getting plenty of bites, but it is just a case of being nice and crisp on the strike and trying to connect with them. Obviously it is quite difficult because of the length of line that you're fishing away from you, and the fact that these fish are naturally very finicky. Got another one on now. Slightly better stamp, this one. As you can see, what I do when I'm playing these fish is just keep the rod nice and low and just play them on the drag. Be able to swing this one just about. Obviously, if you do bring the rod high, you are likely to pull these tiny little hooks out. But another mint condition Calder and Hebble roach, that one. This is also a method as well that I will say can lend itself to wider sections of canal where you do have a few chub across to the far bank. Obviously, if you were fishing for big chub and hide and things like that, you would just step up the gear slightly. But it can be quite a good way to catch some of those warier fish that do spook as soon as they see a pull go over their heads. There's a better fish now on the Waggler. Again, just playing it nice and gentle. Not entirely sure what it is yet. It's just jagging its head a bit. That's a lovely roach to catch. Luckily the hook's just dropped out in the net there, but as you can see, that's a fantastic roach out of the canal. These are the kind of fish we're after today. Right, there's another fish now on the Waggler. Smaller stamp, this one, and it seems that the bites are starting to dry up just a little bit. As I say, we've had a good run at the start. Another lovely little canal roach. So what I think we'll do is I'll just have a switch to the link ledger, and hopefully that might bring a few more fish. It's quite often that on these canals, on the same line, if you just switch the form of presentation, you can seem to get a few more bites. So as I say, we'll give this a cast now and see if we can catch one. Exactly the same kind of thing. I've clipped up to the far bank with this and just using single maggot on the hook. So obviously with a method like this, it's important that you just take your time sinking the line. You've only got 2 SSG shot as your ledger weight, so that's only 3.2 grams. So obviously that makes the rig nice and sensitive, but if you're too aggressive with how you're sinking the line, you'll end up dragging that lead back towards you, and obviously this time of year in autumn, you'll end up dragging that bait into the leaves and debris that's on the bottom at the far bank. So again with this, I'm just going to leave this cast for, there's an indication of a fish straight away. See how absolutely instantaneous that was compared to the Waggler. Lovely little bite, another lovely roach. Slightly bigger stamp this time, another cracking fish. You can see how that change of presentation has instantly brought a fish there, so it just shows the difference that it can make, and it's always worth setting up a link ledger. I think the fish do often go for the bait on the link ledger very quickly because it falls through the water so naturally, and even slower than it will do on the Waggler, because you've got a nice length of line there with no shot on it. And I think those fish are watching that bait settle and, well, fall and then settle, and then they just pick it up once it's hit the bottom. So very often you'll get bites just after you've finished sinking the line. Bit of a poor cast that time, just need to make sure that I'm hitting the clip. Again, same thing with these very light weights that you're using to cast. That's a bit better. Just need to make sure you're reaching that clip. Obviously what that also does is it puts that hook bait the far side of the lead, making sure that it's all out in a nice line, which is what you want to achieve perfect presentation on the canal. Obviously with a method like this, it's absolutely imperative that you use a really nice light soft rod with very light quiver tips like the Sigma wand, but equally you need a very thin main line to do this. As I say, otherwise you'll struggle to get that line to cut through the surface tension and sink, because very rarely on the canal will you get much of a ripple, which does help you sink the line. When it's flat calm, there's a lot more surface tension, it can be hard to get that line to cut through. Often something that can pay off is just dragging that link ledger back just a little bit. You can often entice bites from perch by doing that. And it's also a great way, again using light lines like this, to feel around on the bottom and just try and get a gauge of what kind of bottom you're fishing on, whether it's silty, whether it's rocky, or whether there's a lot of debris, by just dragging those SSG shot along the bottom there. They'll just bump over any sort of debris and things like that, and you'll get a good reading of how much debris is on the bottom and things like that. So obviously again it's just important to get a little bit of feed trickling in each time. And then it's just a case of waiting for a bite. There we go, just as I've twitched that bait there, I've hooked a fish that's just come off. Might be able to hear there the drag going. Just hooked, I think it's probably a small perch or something like that. Obviously just nicked him very lightly. It just goes to show when you do twitch that bait how it can just induce bites, and this rig and method's a great way of doing that. Right, so there's another fish on the link ledger there. Tiniest little vibration on the quiver tip, you can barely even see the indications. Might just be able to swing him because we're on a bigger hook. But you can see that's a much better stamp approach on the link ledger. As I say, from the tiniest little bites as well. Gorgeous little fish. So it's nice and steady on the link, but again, this time in the session you want to be thinking about whether to move back onto the Waggler and get a bit more bait into the peg, or whether to just stick it out on the link and hope for a slightly bigger fish. Again, just slipping a maggot on doesn't seem to make much difference today whether we use bronze or reds. It's always worth having a selection in your bait box as hook bait changes. So again, just a case of sinking that line. Obviously just watching the quiver tip, because you can often get bites just as that link ledge is settling. As you can see, just as I'm putting it on the rest, I'll just twitch it back towards me a little bit to get everything straightened out. Tiny little pluck there on the quiver tip. So you very often get these very tiny little indications, and those are the things you need to strike at. So on the canal you're looking to strike at every little movement, because very often those tiny little indications can often be the biggest fish. So again, just looking at my far bank marker, you can see just how close to the far bank that link ledger lands, which again, in the same way with the Waggler, gives me the opportunity to drag that back towards me. Say if I feel that the fish have dropped into the deep water closer to me, further down the shelf, I can do that with this. So again, once that's settled, all I'll do is just lift it a little bit and drag it towards me and just set it back down again. And as I say, very often that can induce a bite. One thing that I will obviously mention with this is, in terms of the line choice, I'm using mono, but the key thing is that, especially with this day with TDR, it's pre-stretched, which means that there's very little stretch left in the line. So when you do get an indication, it's much more direct on the quiver tip. So it's almost like fishing as braid, not quite as direct, but very similar. So if I was using something like Maxima or Bayer Pearl on something more traditional, I'd have difficulty seeing a lot of these bites. But using a pre-stretched, nice, thin, modern, high-tech line like this allows you to see those tiny little plucks on the quiver tip. So again, leave that settle for a bit and just gently drag that back towards me. Straight away there, by watching the quiver tip, I can just feel that bit of the canal there's a lot siltier. You can just feel those shot dragging through the silt a little bit. It seems that when I do drag the ledger a bit closer to me, that the canal, the bottom of the canal is a lot rockier. So again, these are just useful little things you can pick up from using rod and line like this. Just to give you a bit of an idea of what's in your peg. So again, just going to feed a few more grains of hemp, and in a very similar fashion to when I'm waggler fishing, I'll look to recast this quite often. Again, just twitching it back towards me after I've fed. And as I say, this fantastic way of catching perch on the canal is this. They often do react to that bait just being moved along the bottom. As I say, out of the two out of the 4 bites that I've had on this have come from when I've been moving that lead along the bottom. They've gone and taken it just as it's been twitched. So I think I'll bring that in and have a recast. Again, the bait's not damaged anyway, so not too worried about putting that back out there. And again, right up to the far bank. Cast this time probably about 2 foot to the right of where my last cast was, and again, just going to look to sort of look around the feed area a little bit more. As I say, that's the thing that you want to be doing when you are fishing rod and line on the canal. You'll never really achieve that same level of presentation that you'll get with the pole. So you do want to just look around your feed area and see where you can pick fish off from, because quite often you'll pick up the bigger perch and roach on the edge or at the back of your feed base. There you go, nice bite there. You might be able to see that on the camera. And another fish on. Don't think it's a big one, but again, just putting fish in the net and getting a few bites. Another decent stamp roach. There you go, another one on the link ledger that time. So I think we'll pop him in the net, and I think I'll have another go on the waggler and just get a bit more bait in the peg by doing that. Right, so as you can see now, I'm going to go back on the Waggler after a good little stint on the link there. The link's excellent for picking off a few fish when your peg seems to go quiet, but I think there's clearly one or two fish out there, and it's much easier to get into a rhythm of feeding and casting and hitting bites on the Waggler than it is with the link ledger. Obviously when you're fishing on the link you need to be watching that a lot more and bite straight away there. So I say we're drawing into the evening or towards late afternoon anyway now, and that's usually when the fish will start to have a bit of a feed. So in order to get a decent level of competition going, it is important that you do consider that when you're thinking about your approach. And obviously by doing this and switching to the Waggler I'm able to up the feed, so hopefully we'll get a few more fish in the peg and a bit more competition. Maybe if we're lucky we might catch another decent roach as well. There we go. Another fish on the Waggler there. Again, still with a small stamp, but it's all about keeping these ounces being put in the net and just having a bit of fun catching small fish using simple methods on a canal like this. Surprisingly, we haven't had running 20 perch yet, but we may well do so as the light levels start to drop a little bit. So I do know there's one or two nice perch in this section, so hopefully might encounter one or two if we're lucky. But I think just by introducing hemp I've managed to keep a few more roach in the peg as well. See, I don't want to go feeding too many maggots, because as I've said earlier, they're quite a rich bait and can very often overfeed the fish. So it's just about being nice and delicate with this approach, just trying to get as many bites as possible. There's another small fish on now. Absolutely tiny, probably one of this year's or last year's fry, that one. It was just dropped off. Lovely little fish. As I say, I do know that there's one or two bigger roach in this section, and we've had one so far today. Or actually two, one that's slightly smaller than the biggest one we've had on the Waggler. And hopefully we'll get a couple more of those if we do. Get a decent run of them. We'll hopefully be able to show those to camera. But again, it's not guaranteed on these canals. Those kind of shoals of roach, they're not in big numbers, and you are kind of relying on those just to crop up in your peg. But very often there'll be quite a few resident small roach that'll happily come to the feed like these are now, getting plenty of bites. Interestingly, a lot of these fish aren't actually busting the maggot, so it shows how tentative they're being. They're just picking the bait up and dropping it. So again, as soon as that float's gone in, just following it up with a few grains of hemp. And then I'll think about how many maggots to introduce according to how many bites I'm getting. There's another fish now. Slightly better stamp, so again just keeping the rod low, making sure I don't pull the hook out. Then very quickly the fish is in your hand. Again, obviously you can see how quickly I'm able to get these fish out using rod and line, whereas if I was using say a number 2 or 3 elastic, they'd be playing around just in front of the reeds and be a prime target for pike to hit. So again, something useful just to think about if you do have plenty of pike in your section of canal. and they do cause you problems when you're bringing the fish in. I think because we've had to hit so many bites so far, that hook's starting to go blunt, so I think I may well look to change it if I do start bumping 1 or 2 fish. Because again, when you are getting very finicky bites, it's absolutely imperative that you do have an ultra sharp hook. So this cast I'm just going to put in a couple of maggots. Because obviously those are the hook bait samples, so it's important that you do get a few of those going in. If you just fed hemp, very often quality roach can just get preoccupied by it and they'll completely ignore every other bait, so you've just got to be careful with it sometimes. But again, it's just about sussing out the peg on the day. Obviously this style of fishing, it's a really nice change from lugging around all the kit for the pole, and it's just nice to catch a few fish on the Waggler sometimes. It's a method that's not really used that often when you do go fishing and see people, especially on canals, as I say. Very few people are actually fishing the Waggler. There's another fish on now, and a slightly better stamp, this one. Just bringing him in nice and gently, just swing him to hand. And it is just a really nice, simple way of catching little fish like this. It's also a great way to get into canal fishing, obviously, as a beginner, where pole fishing can be quite difficult and quite confusing. But obviously you do need a lot more money to take up pole fishing, whereas a Waggler rod and decent reel won't set you back too much money, and you can still get onto the canals and catch a few fish like we're doing today. And as I said earlier, it is quite a difficult way of getting into fishing on canals with a rod and line, but it's just these little tips and ways of going about fishing a Waggler as we are doing today, like clipping up to the far bank, sinking the line, choice of line and tackle that you do use, that makes all the difference between catching 1 or 2 fish, as you can see today, getting quite a few bites. There's another one now. Another quality fish, this one feels like. Again, you can just see I'm just using the drag on the reel and winding constantly, nice and gently, and letting the drag do the work for me. Again, another cracking stamp roach, that, if you'll get in the net. Just about get him. You can see I'm reaching out to get these fish in the net. I don't want to bring them too close in and risk having the pike grab them. Hook's just dropped out in the net again with this one, but again, a lovely, absolutely immaculate stamp roach, that one. As you can see, not a mark on him. Oh, another one. Right, there's another nice fish now on the Waggler. Just see it turn in the water as we hooked it. It looks like a big roach, this. As I say, just setting that drag nice and slack, and just keeping the rod low. It's a quality roach, this. You've just got to be really careful when you are playing them that you don't pull the hook out. As you can see as they jag there, it's important that you do have soft rods and a quality drag on your reel to play them. Actually, I'm not sure whether this is a roach. Right, it is. That's a fantastic fish. Hopefully just get his head up. That's an absolutely outstanding fish to catch on the canal, that one. It's easily over £1 pound. That's definitely the biggest roach I've ever caught, that one. Can't believe that. How about that for a canal roach? An absolutely clonking fish, well over £1 pound, that one. Again, just goes to show how these simple tactics can be really effective. What a fantastic fish to catch. Right, so as you can see now, we're starting to lose the light a little bit as we draw right towards evening. So I'm going to go for the last cast of the day and hopefully be able to get a fish to end on. Again, just reaching the clip nice and easy and sinking the line. As you can see at this time of year, the canal really does look picturesque. So we're just getting into autumn now and the leaves are finally starting to turn and fall, so I've just missed a bite there. The next few weeks probably we'll see a lot of the trees turning a bit more bare. And obviously when it does do that, then the canal can be very difficult to fish because of the leaf coverage. But today luckily there's not been too many causing problems. So as you can see, we've not caught a massive stamp of fish today, but we've had quite a few decent ones and just generally a good few hours sport really, catching nice roach and one or two perch as well. Still plenty of fish activity in the peg. And as I say, I can't really complain. We've come down here today just for a few hours and used a nice simple approach, managed to get a few bites and a few fish as well. So I'm just going to persevere with this cast now and hopefully get a nice fish to end on. You can see the float's constantly moving. There's definitely one or two fish down there. So just check the maggot, have another cast. So this last cast now turned into 3, but just want to try and get a fish to end on if we're lucky. It's always nice when you can end on a fish on a session like this. So we've had plenty of bites today, so can't really complain at all. As I say, just by keeping the feed nice and accurate, just fishing one line and just focusing on that and trying to make that work, I've got plenty of bites today and had a really good little bit of sport. There's a fish to end on. Feels like a good one this actually. I think this might be a nice roach actually. As I say, just keeping that rod low, playing the fish on the drag if I need to. And that'll be a lovely fish to end on that one. Hopefully we can just turn him, get him in the net. And there we go, that can be our last fish of the session. Cracking roach to catch on the canal, and another lovely quality roach to end on. How about that for a fish? A cracking canal roach caught on the Waggler. Lovely way to go about the canal fishing. So what we'll do now, get him popped in the keep net and show you what we've caught. Right, so there you go. As you can see, that's our final net of fish there. Probably 4 or 5 pound of lovely roach caught on the Waggler and the link ledger in just a few hours. As you can see, if you get your tactics right and fish nice and fine and with a bit of finesse, using rod and line tactics as we've done today, you can catch some lovely fish like these. As you can see, we've had some clonking roach like that one or two of that stamp, and plenty of smaller fish as well. So as you can see, a gorgeous net of fish to catch from our local canal. And as I say, certainly something that you can relate into your fishing when you go into local canals and you just have a few hours. You don't want to take all the pole kit and just use rod and line tactics. So that's all we've done today from last cast. As I say, it's been a nice session, great to get down here for a few hours. So as always, hopefully you've learnt a couple of things. Don't forget to subscribe and we'll see you on that next episode.